The bank loan wasn't for his new business. It was for a gambling debt he owed to a loan shark. This is what happens when a child's desperation becomes more powerful than their conscience. He thought the greatest danger was the man coming to collect. He didn't realize the real threat was the single photo his mother found on her porch security camera. So how does a blurry image from a doorbell cam make a grown man sign a legal confession that will cost him his home? Carol Whitaker's life was a testament to order. At 65, she ran her world with the quiet efficiency of the bookkeeper she'd been for 40 years. Her checkbook balanced to the penny. The spices in her pantry were arranged alphabetically, and the most important entry on her personal balance sheet was the one that read, "Mortgage, 0." The home she had shared with her late husband, Robert, was hers, free and clear, a sanctuary of stability she had meticulously maintained. Her son Mark was the centerpiece of that sanctuary. At 38, he had his father's ambitious eyes, and a charisma that always seemed to promise success was just around the corner. When he came to her that spring with a binder full of business plans and spreadsheets, Carol felt a familiar swell of maternal pride. He wanted to open a small, bespoke furniture workshop, just like Robert had always dreamed of doing. He needed a small business loan to secure the lease on a workshop and buy the initial equipment. The bank, however, was hesitant without more collateral. He spread the papers across her polished dining room table, his voice full of the same infectious enthusiasm his father once had. He wasn't asking for a handout, just a co-signature, a show of faith. He wanted her to put the house up as collateral. For a moment, a sliver of caution pierced her confidence, the bookkeeper in her whispering about risk. But then she looked at her son's face, alive with hope, and saw the echo of her husband. This wasn't just about business, it was about legacy. She agreed. Signing the papers at the bank, her signature neat and confident next to his, felt like the most natural act in the world. It was an investment not in a business, but in her son's future, in the future of her grandchildren. To help him manage his initial cash flow, Carol had suggested a small joint checking account, just for household bills, gas, groceries, in case of an emergency. It will be easier for me to transfer a little something to help out if you need it, without it seeming like a formal allowance. Mark agreed readily. Carol made a regular, modest deposit every month, a silent subsidy to ease the pressure as his business found its footing. It was through this account that she first noticed the small cracks in the foundation of her trust. The first anomaly was small enough to dismiss: an ATM withdrawal for $300 at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. The location stamp was from a casino resort 40 miles outside the city. When she casually asked about it, Mark was ready with an explanation. Oh, that had to meet a potential lumber supplier for a late dinner. He was staying there for a conference. The restaurant was surprisingly high-end. The explanation felt thin. A lumber supplier meeting at a casino? But she let it go. To question it further felt like an intrusion, like she didn't trust the son she had just mortgaged her home for. He was her partner, not his warden. 2 weeks later, another withdrawal. This time $400 from the same location. Her inquiry was met with a flicker of irritation. Another client meeting, Mom. This is how networking works. You have to go where the clients are. The answer was quicker this time, less detailed. A small knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It was the same feeling she used to get when he was a teenager and his stories about where he'd been after school didn't quite add up. But he was a grown man now, a husband and a father. She told herself she was being foolish. The inciting incident, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation. It was a single line item on a monthly bank statement. Carol sat at the old oak desk in her study, performing the ritual that had governed her financial life for decades, balancing her accounts. Her pen moved down the column of debits, checking each one off. Groceries, utility bill, Mark's card payment, another casino ATM withdrawal that made her press her lips together in silent disapproval. And then she saw it. A direct transfer. Not a check, not an ATM withdrawal, a clean digital movement of funds from their joint account to a holding company she had never heard of. Synergy Holdings, LLC. The amount was $5,000. It wasn't a bill. It didn't fit the description of any equipment he had mentioned. It was a large, round, inexplicable number. Carol stared at the statement, the neat columns of figures suddenly seeming alien and threatening. Her world of balanced ledgers and predictable outcomes had just been breached. This single, irrefutable fact, printed in cold black ink, could not be dismissed. It wasn't a client dinner. It wasn't a networking opportunity. It was a secret. And she, the meticulous keeper of the records, knew with chilling certainty that it was her job to find out what it meant.
The bookkeeper in Carol took over. Emotion was a liability. Data was truth. The first step was to understand the entity that had received her money. She typed Synergy Holdings, LLC into the search bar of her desktop computer, her fingers moving with the swift precision of decades of clerical work. The results were scant and anonymous. A recently registered holding company with a generic business address that traced back to a mail forwarding service downtown. No website. No public record of its officers. It was a digital ghost, designed to be untraceable. This was not the footprint of a legitimate business supplier. This was the architecture of concealment. The knot of unease in her stomach cooled into a hard stone of dread. She opened a new spreadsheet on her computer, the cells clean and empty. At the top of the first column, she typed date. In the next, anomaly. It was time to build a case. Her investigation was not a dramatic sprint. It was a methodical grind. She spent the next 3 evenings at her desk, the soft glow of the monitor illuminating her focused expression. She began with a digital trail. Mark was not careful online. He, like so many of his generation, lived his life in a stream of publicly accessible data points, assuming no one was paying attention. But Carol was paying attention now. She started with his social media. His public posts were a curated feed of family life and entrepreneurial hustle. Photos of his children at the park, optimistic updates about his workshop. But the geotags told a different story. The client dinner on that first Tuesday night, the timestamp on his post about a successful meeting with 8:30 p.m., the geotag placed him at the casino. An hour later, a different geotag appeared on a photo from his wife's account, showing Mark at home with the kids. It was a small discrepancy, easily missed, but to a bookkeeper, it was an unbalanced ledger. A lie. She dug deeper. She didn't have his passwords, but she didn't need them. She went through their shared cloud account, ostensibly set up to share family photos. In a folder mislabeled Vacation Pics 2022, she found screenshots, not of beaches, but of online betting slips, horse races, poker tournaments, small bets at first, then larger, more desperate ones. The dates corresponded perfectly with the larger cash withdrawals. He wasn't meeting clients. He was feeding a habit. Each discovery felt like a small, private death. The image of Mark as a dedicated entrepreneur, the spiritual successor to his father, was dissolving pixel by pixel, replaced by a portrait of a man she didn't recognize. A man who lied to his mother with casual ease. a man who used the money meant for his family's security to chase a losing hand. She felt a profound sadness settle over her, not of anger, but of a deep, hollow disappointment. The paper trail was just as damning. One afternoon, while gathering the recycling, she noticed a crumpled gas station receipt in the bottom of the kitchen trash can. Smoothing it out, she saw the purchase time, 2:15 a.m. The location was a 24-hour station near the very casino he claimed he was only visiting for meetings. The receipt wasn't for gas. It was for 3 Red Bulls and a pack of antacids. It was a receipt of a man fighting off sleep, his stomach churning with stress. It was the mundane, undeniable proof of a late-night gambling run. She began going through the past 3 months of their joint bank statements, the ones she had previously scanned only for accuracy. Now she looked for patterns. With a yellow highlighter, she marked every ATM withdrawal made near a casino or betting parlor. She highlighted every late-night convenience store purchase. When she was done, the pages were a sea of yellow. The withdrawals formed a chilling, escalating pattern. Small amounts at first, then larger, more frequent ones. The financial bleed was accelerating. The final piece of the initial investigation came from an unexpected source: the mail. An official-looking letter arrived, addressed not to her, but to Mark at her address. It was from the city, a final notice for an unpaid parking ticket. The violation date was from 6 weeks ago. The location was a street deep in an industrial part of the city, an area known for underground card rooms and illicit dealings, an area Mark had no business being in at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. She placed the parking ticket on the growing pile of evidence on her desk. The spreadsheet she had created was no longer empty. It was filled with dates, times, locations, and amounts, a cold, factual narrative of her son's secret life. The small anomalies, the vague explanations, the late-night withdrawals weren't random inconsistencies. They were the meticulously documented entries in a ledger of betrayal. The file case was almost complete. All that was missing was the final, devastating piece of evidence that would explain the purpose of Synergy Holdings, LLC, the piece that would turn her quiet dread into undeniable, shattering truth.
The search for Synergy Holdings, LLC became Carol's quiet obsession. The corporate registration, as she had discovered, was a dead end, a shell designed for anonymity. But every shell has a creator. Using a public records database she had access to through a subscription for her old bookkeeping business, she ran a search not for the company, but for the bank account it was tied to, the destination of her $5,000. The digital transfer had left a trace, a routing number, a destination bank. It was a single loose thread, and she began to pull. It took her 2 days of meticulous cross-referencing, but she found him. The sole signatory on the Synergy Holdings account was a man named Vincent Rinaldi. The name meant nothing to her, but it felt solid, real, a name she could investigate. When she typed Vincent Rinaldi and gambling into the search engine, her carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. The first result was a 3-year-old newspaper article from the local crime beat. The headline was stark: "Local businessman acquitted in loan sharking case." The photo accompanying the article showed a large man with a shaved head and a broken nose, his eyes cold and flat. It was the face of a predator. The article detailed accusations of exorbitant interest rates, intimidation tactics, and connections to organized crime. The charges had been dropped on a technicality. Synergy Holdings wasn't a supplier. It was a vessel for laundering money from people exactly like her son, desperate, addicted, and willing to sign anything. The click of understanding was not a flash of insight. It was a slow, crushing weight. The $5,000 transfer wasn't a business investment. It was an interest payment, an offering to a shark to keep him at bay. And the collateral for this sordid transaction wasn't just Mark's future, it was her home, her sanctuary, the paid-off brick-and-mortar symbol of her and Robert's entire life together, now entangled in the filthy machinery of Vincent Rinaldi's operation. She pushed her chair back from the desk, a wave of nausea rolling through her. The air in her small study felt suddenly thin, hard to breathe. For a long moment, she just sat there, the screensaver on her computer idly drifting across the screen, a serene image of a forest that felt like a mockery. The clock on the wall kept ticking. It's funny, the world doesn't stop. It makes one wonder, what time is it where you are right now? Her grief was not loud. It was a quiet, internal implosion. She stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, her movements stiff and robotic. She picked up a framed photograph of Robert, taken on their 30th anniversary. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners. They had paid off the house that year. He'd held up the final mortgage statement like a trophy. "We're safe, Carol," he'd said. "No matter what happens, we're safe." She traced the outline of his face with her fingertip, a single tear finally escaping and falling onto the glass. The rage she had expected to feel wasn't there. It had been replaced by a chilling, absolute clarity. The problem was no longer just her son's gambling. The problem now had a name and a face, and he had a legal claim, however predatory, on her home. The sanctuary was not just being disrespected from within, it was under siege from the outside. The sadness in her heart began to cool, hardening into something else, something cold and resolute. She placed the photograph back on the mantel with a steady hand, her decision made. She was no longer investigating a mystery. She was preparing for war. The grief didn't vanish, but it transformed. Over the next week, it annealed into the cold, hard certainty of a strategist. The sentimental mother receded, and the meticulous bookkeeper took complete control. She understood that emotional appeals to her son were now useless. The situation had moved beyond family drama and into the cold, unforgiving territory of legal and financial warfare. Her objective was no longer to understand her son's betrayal, but to methodically sever its connection to her sanctuary. Her first call was to a financial advisor, a discreet professional she had used for years to manage her own small portfolio. She didn't want legal advice yet. She wanted intelligence. She needed to understand the battlefield. She explained the situation calmly and factually. The co-signed loan, her home as collateral, the newly discovered connection to a known loan shark. She asked a single precise question. What is my exact financial exposure, and what are my legal vulnerabilities? The advisor's response, delivered an hour later after a review of the loan documents she faxed over, was sobering. By co-signing, she had made herself fully liable for the entire loan amount, regardless of her son's actions. If Mark defaulted, the bank, or whoever now held the debt, could and would come after her home. She was legally and financially bound to her son's catastrophic mistake. The knowledge, while grim, did not cause her to panic. It clarified her next move. The core of her campaign would be the meticulous assembly of a case file. Her kitchen table, once the heart of her family life, became a war room. She laid out the bank statements, the ATM receipts, the social media screenshots, the unpaid parking ticket, each one a small, damning fact. She bought a new pack of highlighters, a binder, and a set of color-coded tabs. She worked with the quiet, focused intensity of an auditor preparing for a high-stakes investigation.
She spent an entire afternoon on the phone, her voice a calm, professional monotone that she navigated the automated menus of credit card companies and city services. She wasn't accusing, she was gathering data. She requested time-stamped transaction histories for the joint account. She obtained official copies of Mark's vehicle registration to confirm his travel patterns. She was building a timeline, a precise, irrefutable narrative of her son's movements and expenditures over the last 6 months. The weapon at the heart of her case file, she knew, would be the most undeniable piece of evidence she could find. Mark's digital and paper trails painted a clear picture of his gambling, but she needed something that tied him directly to the loan shark. She needed proof of the payoff. She found it, not in a bank statement, but in the cloud. That night, after hours of methodical searching, she accessed her home security system's online portal. The front porch camera, installed after Robert's death for her own peace of mind, automatically saved all motion-activated recordings to a server for 30 days. The irony was bitter. The system meant to protect her sanctuary from external threats was about to reveal the gravest threat had come from within. She scrolled back through weeks of footage, the mail carrier's daily visits, a neighbor's dog wandering onto our lawn, a Girl Scout selling cookies. Then she found it. Dated 2 weeks prior, the timestamp was 1:47 a.m. The camera had activated when a dark, unfamiliar car pulled into her driveway and turned off its headlights. The night vision footage was grainy but clear. It showed Mark, his face pale and strained in the harsh glare of the porch light, walking quickly from her front door to the car. It showed him handing a thick white envelope to a shadowy figure in the driver's seat. It showed the car pulling away, leaving her son standing alone in the darkness of her driveway, his shoulders slumped in what looked like a mixture of relief and defeat. She downloaded the clip and saved it to a dedicated, password-protected thumb drive. She made 2 copies. This was it, the visual confirmation, the undeniable link between her son, her home, and Vincent Rinaldi's world. Her quiet campaign was now entering its final phase. With her evidence assembled, she contacted a lawyer. Not a bulldog litigator, but a specialist in quiet, high-stakes contract negotiation. At the initial meeting, she didn't weep or rage. She opened her binder and presented her case with the cold, irrefutable logic of the bookkeeper she was. The bank statements, the timeline, and finally the security camera footage, which she played on her laptop without a word. The lawyer watched, his expression grim. "He used your home as a drop-off point for a payment to a loan shark," he stated, his voice a flat confirmation of the reality she had already accepted. "Yes," Carol replied, "and I want him legally disentangled from my life and my property. Quietly, if possible, but completely." The lawyer nodded. The loan is the leverage. His desperation is the weakness. He began to outline a strategy. The reckoning was not a storm. It was a quiet, cold front. Carol's lawyer sent a single formal letter, not to Mark, but to the bank that held the original loan. The letter was a masterpiece of legal understatement. It expressed a grave concern on behalf of Mrs. Carol Whitaker regarding the potential co-opting of a legitimate small business loan for illicit activities, and requested an urgent in-person meeting to discuss the structural integrity of the loan agreement and the associated collateral. A copy of the letter was forwarded to Mark with a brief clinical note suggesting his presence at the meeting would be prudent. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday in a sterile conference room at the bank's downtown headquarters. Carol arrived 10 minutes early, her lawyer at her side. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. In her handbag, she carried a small, sealed envelope. She was not there as a grieving mother. She was there as the primary guarantor of a compromised financial instrument. Mark arrived precisely on time, alone. He had attempted to bring Vincent Rinaldi's lawyer, but the bank had politely informed him that the meeting was strictly for the original signatories of the loan. He looked tired and cornered, his usual charisma replaced by a brittle defensiveness. He sat opposite his mother at the long polished table, avoiding her gaze. The bank's loan officer, a woman with a practiced neutral expression, began the meeting. "We are here to discuss certain irregularities that have come to our attention regarding the disbursement of the funds associated with loan number 74B-2. Mrs. Whitaker, perhaps you could begin." Carol did not speak. She simply opened her handbag, removed the sealed envelope, and slid it across the table to her son. "I believe this is the central exhibit," she said, her voice even and calm. Mark hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside was a single 8x10 glossy photograph. It was a still frame from the security camera footage, a crystal clear image of him in her driveway, passing the white envelope to the shadowy figure in the car. His reaction was immediate and visceral. The color drained from his face. A small choked sound escaped his lips. He looked from the photo to his mother, his eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. He had been caught, not by a detective or a lawyer, but by the quiet, methodical diligence of the woman he had so profoundly underestimated. "I believe that envelope contained a cash payment to Mr. Vincent Rinaldi, the purpose of which was to service a private high-interest loan not covered by our agreement with this bank. Is that correct?" Mark stammered, his facade crumbling. It was a separate business, telling it has nothing to do with this. "It has everything to do with this," Carol countered, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Because the collateral for Mr. Rinaldi's business dealing is my home, the same home that secures this loan. You have placed my sanctuary in the hands of a known criminal." The loan officer cleared her throat, her professional neutrality cracking. "Mr. Whitaker, engaging in such activities while using a bank-issued loan for which your mother's property is collateral constitutes a material breach of your loan agreement, a breach that could trigger an immediate demand for full repayment." The reality of his situation finally landed. He was trapped. The bank could call in the loan, Rinaldi could come after him, and his mother held the one piece of evidence that could unravel everything. His defiance evaporated, replaced by the raw, undisguised fear of a man with no way out. This was the moment Carol had prepared for, the procedural checkmate. Her lawyer slid a new document across the table. It was a simple addendum to the original loan agreement. It stated that due to a fundamental restructuring of the associated business, Mr. Mark Whitaker would be assuming sole legal and financial responsibility for the entire loan amount. In exchange, Mrs. Carol Whitaker would formally withdraw her home as collateral. "You have two options, Mark. You can sign this document freeing my home from the consequences of your choices, or I will provide this photograph and the entirety of my investigative file to Mr. Rinaldi, to the district attorney, and to this bank's fraud division. The choice is yours." The surrender was absolute. With a hand that trembled visibly, Mark picked up the pen and signed the document. He didn't look at his mother. He couldn't. He was so sure of his ability to manage his secret world, so confident in her quiet maternal blindness. He never considered that the bookkeeper would do the math and discover the catastrophic imbalance. He signed away his claim to her protection, his signature a stark admission of his defeat. Her journey revealed that true strength isn't found in a clean victory, but in the quiet, methodical process of self-preservation and balancing the scales of dignity. If you believe that dignity is worth fighting for, even in silence, consider subscribing. What was the one small, undeniable fact that finally showed you the truth?